They say New York is the city that never sleeps. Neon lights always buzzing, sirens screaming through the streets, footsteps echoing in the subways long after midnight. But what people forget is, when a city never sleeps, the nightmares don't rest either. They wander, they wait, they find you when you least expect it. It was just past 1:37 in the morning when the call came in. A detective with over 12 years on the force, working homicide, sitting alone in his tiny office on the Lower East Side. Paperwork stacked like bricks, coffee cold, the sound of rain ticking against the window like impatient fingers. His phone buzzed, and at first, he thought it was just another drunk call, some noise complaint, some routine job. But the voice on the other end wasn't like anything he'd ever heard before. A deep, cracked voice rasped through the static. It wasn't shouting, it wasn't panicked. It was calm, deliberate, like every word was carefully chosen. "Detective, come to the old building on 148th Street before they wake up." That was it. No name, no explanation, no chance to respond. The line went dead. The detective stared at his phone. Calls like this weren't unusual. New York was crawling with pranksters, people who got drunk and thought they were funny. But there was something about that voice, something that crawled under his skin and sat heavy in his chest. He didn't even realize his hand was trembling slightly as he set the receiver back down. He told himself it was nothing, probably some teenagers messing around. But still, the way the man said, "before they wake up," kept replaying in his head. Who was they? What was supposed to wake up? The detective grabbed his coat, holstered his weapon, and stepped out into the rain. New York streets at night have a personality of their own, empty yet alive. Storefronts shuttered but neon signs still glowing. The sound of taxis splashing through puddles. Streetlights flickering like they were fighting to stay alive. He pulled his collar high against the cold drizzle and started the engine of his car. The address led him to Harlem, 148th Street. Not exactly the kind of place you wanted to wander around at night. The buildings there were old, decaying, standing like exhausted giants who'd seen too much. He parked across the street from a 5-story apartment building, windows boarded up, graffiti covering the bricks, the front door hanging crooked on its hinges. Even from across the street, the building seemed to breathe, like something alive was hiding just behind its walls. He sat there for a moment, hand resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the building. He wasn't a rookie. He'd been to crime scenes worse than this one, but something about that place felt wrong. Too still, too quiet, like the whole block was holding its breath. Finally, he exhaled, muttered, "It's just another call," and stepped out. Crossing the street, he noticed a single streetlight flickering above the building's entrance. It buzzed, dimmed, then flared back to life, casting the doorway in a sickly yellow glow. The closer he got, the colder the air felt. Not the chill of rain, but something sharper, biting, unnatural. Inside, the hallway was narrow and smelled of mold and rust. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, exposing cracked plaster beneath. The detective's footsteps echoed far too loudly, like the building was empty, yet listening. On the second floor, he found the apartment door. It was slightly open, creaking as if inviting him inside. He drew his weapon, pushed it open, and entered. The first thing that hit him was the smell. That unmistakable stench of rot, of bodies that had been still for hours. 3 of them, sprawled on the floor. 2 men, 1 woman, their faces pale, lips blue, eyes closed. Dead, no question. He crouched beside one, checked the pulse just to be sure. Nothing. He reached for his radio to call it in, but paused, The room was wrong. The air felt heavy, thick, like being underwater. His skin prickled with static electricity, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood straight up. There was no sound, no neighbors, no city noise, not even the rain he'd heard outside. Just silence. And then, from somewhere deep in the apartment, came the faintest whisper. Not words, not clear, just the sound of something that shouldn't be there. He froze, listened. Nothing. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, louder than the whisper itself. Shaking it off, he told himself it was just the pipes. Old buildings made noises all the time. Still, he couldn't help but glance at the bodies again, 3 of them, still as stone. But the voice on the phone came back to him. Come before they wake up. He didn't like the way those words suddenly made too much sense. He pulled out his notepad, forcing himself to focus, scribbling down observations, details, anything to distract from the silence pressing in around him. But with every second that passed, he felt watched. It wasn't paranoia. He'd felt that before, on stakeouts, in dangerous neighborhoods. This was different. This felt like the room itself was staring at him, like the walls had eyes. And somewhere in the back of his mind, one thought refused to go away. What if they weren't entirely gone? What if the call wasn't a prank at all? The door shut behind him with a slow, groaning creak, and for a moment, the detective thought he heard the sound of someone moving upstairs. He froze, his hand tightening on the grip of his gun. But then, silence. Again, that suffocating silence. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen that looked like it hadn't seen life in years. Dust covered the counters, cobwebs dangled in the corners. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar, humming faintly like an insect dying. The detective's flashlight beams swept across the peeling wallpaper, catching the faces of the 3 corpses once again. 2 men, 1 woman. Their clothes were dirty, worn. They looked like transients, squatters maybe. Nothing unusual in a building like this. But still, the silence. He crouched lower, studying the woman's hands. They were curled tight, the fingernails broken, dirt trapped beneath them, like she had clawed at something before death. He scribbled a note in his pad, but his pen slipped slightly. His hands weren't steady. Something was wrong with the air. He kept thinking of it like water, thick and heavy, as though every breath he took didn't quite fill his lungs. And the smell, God, the smell was stronger here than it should have been. 3 bodies could stink, sure, but this was different. This was metallic, sharp, almost like the air itself was bleeding. He took another cautious step into the kitchen, his boots crunching against broken glass on the floor. The cabinets were open, their hinges rusted. Inside, nothing but dust. Except one. The bottom drawer. It was shut. He reached down and pulled it. It slid out with a sudden shriek of wood and metal. Inside, nothing but an old stack of photographs, water-damaged, edges curled. He lifted one up. The image was blurry, but he could make out faces, smiling faces, families, children, dozens of them, all taken inside this same apartment, same wallpaper in the background, same cracked window. Some of the people were circled in red pen. Others were crossed out. His stomach turned. He shoved the photos back in, slammed the drawer shut, and stood quickly. The sound echoed far too long for such a small space. And then came the whisper again. This time, closer. He spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing, just the bodies, still, motionless. But he could swear their positions had changed. The woman's head. It wasn't facing the ceiling anymore. It was turned slightly, toward him. The detective felt his own pulse quicken. He stepped back, nearly tripping over a broken chair behind him. His weapon was up now, finger brushing the trigger guard. "Who's there?" he barked, voice cracking against the silence. No answer. Just the sound of his own breathing, ragged, too loud in the still air. He forced himself to walk back into the living room, each step heavier than the last. The flashlight beam trembled as it landed back on the corpses. No, they were the same as before, exactly the same. His mind was playing tricks. It had to be. He let out a shaky laugh under his breath, but it didn't last. Because at that exact moment, the radio on his belt crackled. He grabbed it quickly, pressing the button. "This is Detective Carter, Unit 47. I'm at the location. We've got 3 DOAs, requesting backup and forensics." Static. No reply. He tried again, louder. "Dispatch, come in. Do you copy?" More static. Then, faintly. Not dispatch. Not his team. A whisper through the radio. "They're not gone." His throat tightened. He dropped the radio to the floor with a clatter. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, get out. But duty, training, pride, they all chained him in place. He forced himself to stay, to investigate. That was his job. He approached the nearest body again, the man on the left. Pale, cold, eyes shut. He leaned closer, studying the chest. It rose. Barely. A fraction of movement, like a faint breath. The detective stumbled back, flashlight beam jerking wildly. No, that's impossible," he whispered to himself. "They're dead. They're already dead." But the body moved again. This time, the fingers twitched. Just once. Sharp. Intentional. And then, silence again. He backed toward the door, fumbling for the handle, but when he twisted it, the knob wouldn't turn. Jammed. Locked. No matter how hard he pulled, it wouldn't budge. He was trapped. He spun back toward the room, chest heaving. The corpses were still. Perfectly still. And then, all at once, every light in the building flickered. For less than a second, the room went pitch black, and when the lights blinked back to life, the woman's corpse was sitting upright. Her head tilted, her eyes still closed, but her mouth was hanging open. The detective screamed, gun aimed, hands shaking violently. "Stay down," he shouted, though he knew how insane it sounded. Don't move." But the corpse didn't listen. The detective's hand trembled so violently on the grip of his pistol that the barrel rattled against his flashlight. He didn't want to believe what he was seeing. He kept telling himself it was shock, fatigue, maybe even a hallucination from the smell in this god-forsaken place. But hallucinations don't sit up. The woman's corpse sat motionless now, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her mouth stretched open like she was frozen mid-scream. Her eyes were still closed, but somehow that made it worse. The detective swallowed hard, his throat dry, his voice shaking. "Stay down," he whispered again, as if the body would somehow obey. Then came a sound. Not loud, not obvious, just a faint scrape, like fingernails dragging across the wooden floor. His flashlight snapped toward the second corpse, the man lying closest to the door. His hand had shifted, fingers curled, scraping faintly, leaving shallow marks in the dust. The detective's chest tightened, his breath short. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the broken chair again, but he refused to lower his weapon. "Dispatch!" he screamed into the darkness, forgetting the radio was already broken. "God damn it, I need backup!" Only silence answered. Silence and a faint sound of breathing. Not his breathing, theirs. The detective's heart slammed against his ribs. He pointed his flashlight across the three bodies. The second corpse began to stir, his chest rising and falling with jagged, unnatural movements, as if air was forcing its way into rotten lungs. The third, lying near the window, shuddered once, then twice, then slowly rolled onto its side. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "No, you're dead. You're not alive. You can't be alive." But the bodies didn't listen. All three of them began to rise. Not smoothly, not naturally. Their movements were stiff, jerky, bones cracking as they pushed themselves upward like puppets on tangled strings. Their heads lolled from side to side, their jaws hung slack, their eyes still sealed shut, yet somehow they were staring. He could feel it, a pressure drilling into his skull, even though their lids remained closed. The detective backed up until his shoulders slammed against the wall. He raised his weapon, finger trembling on the trigger. "Stop! Don't come any closer!" And then they moved. The woman's corpse jerked forward, one leg dragging behind, the sound of her bare heels scraping against the wood. The two men staggered with her, their bodies twitching in unison. The detective fired.
The flash lit up the room, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. The bullet tore through the first corpse's chest, sending her backward. She collapsed in a heap on the floor. The detective's ears rang, smoke filling his nose. For a second, he thought it was over, that he'd stopped it, that maybe this nightmare was just some insane squatter drug trip and he was back in control. But then, the woman's corpse twitched. Her head snapped upright with a sickening crack. Slowly, impossibly, she began to rise again. The detective's mouth went dry. He fired again. Once, twice, 3 times. Each shot echoed through the building, glass shattering, wood splintering. Each bullet struck, tearing flesh, snapping bone. But still, they kept moving. Slow, relentless, like death wasn't the end anymore. The flashlight beam shook violently as he scrambled back toward the kitchen, heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. His gun clicked empty. He cursed, fumbling for a spare clip with trembling hands, sweat pouring down his face. Then, from somewhere deep in the apartment, came that whisper again. Only this time, it was clear. "You shouldn't have come alone." The detective froze. That voice, the same one from the phone, the one that called him here. It wasn't in his head. It was here, in this apartment. He slammed the clip into his gun, turned wildly, but the corpses weren't in front of him anymore. They had vanished. The room was empty. His breath came fast and ragged, chest rising and falling. He swept the flashlight across the floor, the walls, the doorway. Nothing. No bodies, no movement, just dust and shadows. Then, a sound above him. He tilted his light up toward the ceiling. More steps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. And then, 3 sets of footsteps. The detective's stomach dropped. They weren't gone. They had gone upstairs. For a moment, he considered running, kicking the door, smashing the window, anything to get out. But his legs wouldn't move. His duty, his cursed duty, chained him here. He had to know. He had to see. He raised the gun, tightened his jaw, and began climbing the stairs. Each step groaned beneath his weight. Each shadow seemed to move just before his flashlight touched it. The building smelled worse now, like earth, damp and cold, mixed with the iron tang of blood. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into darkness. Doors lined both sides, most of them open, black gaps like gaping mouths. And from somewhere at the far end, he heard it. Breathing. 3 voices breathing in unison. The detective gripped his weapon tighter. He knew this was no prank, no trick, no ordinary case. Whatever was in this building was older than him, stronger than him, and very much awake. Still, he stepped forward. 1 slow step at a time, flashlight cutting through the black. His every nerve screamed at him to turn back, but his feet carried him deeper. Because some nightmares don't let you leave. Some nightmares follow you. And as the detective reached the first door on the left, he swore he saw movement in the corner of his eye. A face, pale, grinning. But when he turned, there was nothing. Nothing but shadows. For now.
The hallway stretched like a black throat ahead of him, lined with open doorways that gaped like broken teeth. The detective's boots creaked with every step, the old wood moaning as if the building itself disapproved of his presence. The air here was different, heavier. Each breath carried the weight of mildew, copper, and something else. Something foul, like soil freshly turned in a grave. His flashlight beam wavered against peeling paint and shattered picture frames. Shadows clung stubbornly to the walls, too thick, too dark. He raised his gun, finger brushing the trigger, ears straining from movement. And then there it was again, breathing. 3 of them. Inhale, exhale, all at once, in perfect, unnatural rhythm. The sound crawled across the walls, sometimes ahead of him, sometimes behind. He turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. Still, he could feel them, the corpses, watching, waiting. He whispered to himself, just a case, Carter. Keep moving." His voice didn't even sound like his own anymore. It sounded small, fragile. At the far end of the hallway, he found a door slightly ajar. Light spilled faintly through the crack, flickering light like candle flame. He pushed it open with the barrel of his gun, and what he saw made his stomach twist. Inside the room were dozens of candles, melted down to jagged stubs, wax pooling like blood across the floor. On the walls, symbols were scrawled in something dark. At first, he thought it was paint, but the smell told him otherwise. Blood, circles, lines, words he didn't recognize. And in the center of the room, photographs. Dozens of them, just like the ones he'd found in the kitchen drawer. Families, children, their faces circled, scratched, marked.
Some photos were burned around the edges, others stabbed through with pins. The detective's hands shook as he crouched to pick one up. It showed a man and a woman smiling in front of the very same apartment building. But their eyes had been carefully cut out with a blade. A sudden bang made him drop the photo. He spun around, weapon raised, breath caught in his throat. The sound had come from directly above him. Something had moved, something heavy. Then the breathing returned, clearer than ever. Detective. He stumbled back, flashlight beam jittering wildly across the room. The symbols on the wall seemed to writhe in the light, like snakes twisting just beyond comprehension. Detective Carter, you shouldn't have come alone. The voice wasn't from the radio this time. It wasn't a hallucination. It was in the room with him. He could feel the words vibrate in his chest. The detective raised his gun toward the corner of the room, where the shadow seemed unnaturally thick. His finger tightened on the trigger. And then, out of the darkness, the corpses emerged. All three. The woman first, her neck bent at a grotesque angle, her jaw unhinged wider than humanly possible. Behind her, the two men, twitching with every step, arms jerking like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. But it wasn't just them. Behind their bodies, something else moved. A shape, blacker than the shadows, tall, thin, limbs too long, its head almost scraping the ceiling, and where its face should have been, only a gaping void darker than the room itself. The detective's knees nearly buckled. He tried to speak, to call for backup, but his voice wouldn't work. His throat was locked tight. The corpses staggered closer, their lips still closed, yet the whispering grew louder. Join us, join us, join us. He fired. The bullets tore through the corpses, jerking their bodies violently, but they didn't fall, they didn't stop. Instead, the shadow behind them swelled, its arms stretching wider, curling around the walls like smoke. The room grew colder, frost crawling across the windows, breath fogging in the air. The detective stumbled backward, hitting the wall hard. His gun clattered from his hand, useless. He reached for the door, slammed it shut behind him, and bolted into the hallway. But the whisper followed. Through the walls, through the floor. Before they wake up, we already woke up. The detective's chest heaved, sweat pouring down his face. He raced for the stairwell, his flashlight beam bouncing violently across the walls. The building itself seemed alive now, groaning, shifting, the floor tilting beneath his feet. And then, halfway down the stairs, he froze. They were waiting for him. All three corpses stood at the bottom of the stairwell, heads tilted back, mouths wide open in silent screams. Their bodies twitched, limbs jerking like broken marionettes. The detective's stomach dropped. There was no way out. And from behind him, on the landing above, the sound of something crawling. Slow, deliberate, closer. He spun, flashlight jerking upward, and saw the shadow. Crawling on all fours, its limbs bending the wrong way, its faceless head snapping toward him with a sound like tearing metal. The detective screamed, and then the lights went out.
The blackout wasn't complete. The only light now was the faint orange glow of distant street lamps leaking through broken windows, and even that light seemed suffocated by the walls. The detective stood frozen on the stairwell, his back pressed to the cold banister. He could hear them all around him now. The corpses below, the shadow above, and that whisper, God, that endless whisper. You shouldn't have come here, Carter. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his pulse hammering so violently it felt like his chest might explode. His flashlight was dead. His gun was gone. He had nothing but the pounding of his heart and the sound of his ragged breathing. The corpses shifted at the bottom of the stairs, their heads snapping toward him all at once. Their mouths stretched wide, impossibly wide, skin tearing at the corners. He stumbled back a step, and from above came the crawling again. The shadow thing was descending, its limbs twisting, breaking with every motion, yet never slowing. The detective's eyes darted wildly, searching for escape. He saw it. A door halfway down the landing, barely hanging on its hinges. He ran. He kicked it open and fell inside. The room was small, an old bedroom, empty except for a broken bed frame and a shattered mirror leaning against the wall. He slammed the door shut, chest heaving, but it wouldn't matter. Nothing wooden could hold back whatever that thing was. His eyes flicked toward the mirror, and what he saw nearly stopped his heart. Not his reflection. No. In the cracked glass he saw himself, but standing in the hallway outside the room. His reflection wasn't afraid. It was smiling. Grinning ear to ear, teeth too many, too sharp. The reflection raised its hand slowly and pressed a finger to its lips. Shh. The detective staggered back, shaking his head violently, muttering, "No, no, no, no." His boot struck something on the floor, a small box shoved under the bed frame. He yanked it out with trembling hands. Inside were more photographs. These weren't families. They were police officers, detectives. Every one of them marked with the same circle scratched through the face. At the very back of the stack, his stomach dropped when he found the newest photograph. Himself. Taken tonight, standing outside this very building. He didn't have time to process it, because the door handle began to turn. The corpses were outside. He could hear their fingernails scraping against the wood.
And above the sound, that deep, distorted breathing, the shadow, waiting. The detective raised the box as if it could shield him, his voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" Silence. Then the answer, not whispered, not soft, but thunderous, from everywhere at once. "We already have you." The door exploded inward. Splinters flew. The corpses lurched through, their movements spasmodic and violent. He screamed, throwing the box at them, photos scattering like black snow. He dove for the window, crashing his shoulder against the glass, desperate for open air. He fell, 2 stories down. The world went white with pain as his body struck the pavement, ribs cracking, air knocked clean out of his lungs. He rolled onto his back, gasping, vision blurred. The cold night air filled his lungs, sharp and biting. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he'd escaped. Then he looked up. In every window of the apartment building, faces, dozens of them, pale, lifeless, staring down at him. Their mouths all moved in unison. "Join us." The detective tried to crawl, his fingers clawing at the concrete. Blood poured from his mouth, his vision dimmed. And as he blinked through the haze, he realized something that froze his soul. He wasn't crawling forward anymore. The concrete beneath his hands, it was moving like flesh, pulling him back toward the building. He screamed, clawing, fighting, but the ground swallowed his fingers, then his hands, then his arms. His body was being dragged toward the doorway, back into the dark, back to them. The last thing he saw as his face was pulled into the shadow of the building was the reflection in the shattered glass still clinging to his jacket pocket. Himself. Smiling. Welcoming. And then nothing. Some cases never make it into the reports. Some cases stay buried. But if you ever get a call in the dead of night, a voice telling you to come before they wake up, don't answer, because they're already awake.